The train car smelled of coal smoke and someone else's perfume. The woman calling herself Ingrid Nordstrom sat alone in the third-class compartment, her real name Elsa Anderson buried as deep as the husband she'd left in a Chicago grave. Her knees pressed against the seat in front of her, because even with her legs angled, there was never quite enough room. There never had been. Not in trains, not in pews, not in the small wooden chairs of the Chicago schoolhouse where she'd taught grammar to children who whispered that Miss Anderson looked like a giant from the old fairy tales. She didn't correct them when they said Anderson. That name was dead now, buried with Thomas in the Lutheran cemetery on the south side. Here, traveling west through the infinite white nothing of a January blizzard, she was Nordstrom. Ingrid Nordstrom. Her sister's name smooth and unfamiliar in her mouth like a river stone she couldn't quite swallow. The bundle in her arms stirred. 7 months old, Clara had her mother's dark hair and her mother's small hands, but when she opened her eyes, Elsa saw only Ingrid. Saw her sister at 16 braiding wildflowers into her hair and singing Swedish hymns their grandmother taught them. Saw her at 23, pale and trembling, confessing she was with child and the father would not claim her. Saw her at 24, the light going out of her eyes in a charity ward that smelled of carbolic and dying hope. Don't let them take her to the orphan asylum, Elsa. Promise me. Promise me she'll have a home. Elsa had promised. She'd sold everything. The few books Thomas hadn't burned for kindling during their last terrible winter together. The wedding ring she'd never worn after he died. Her grandmother's silver candlesticks, the only beautiful things she'd ever owned. It had been enough for train fare and $8 left over folded in the bottom of her boot where pickpockets wouldn't think to look. Outside the frost-painted window, Montana Territory stretched endless and white. Mountains rose like broken teeth against a sky the color of old iron. The conductor had said they'd reach Silver Creek by nightfall if the snow didn't get worse, if the tracks stayed clear, if God was merciful, which in Elsa's experience he rarely was to women like her. She pulled out the letters, not the ones Ingrid had written to the rancher. Those were ash now burned in the school furnace the night before Elsa left Chicago. But the replies, 4 of them written in careful, blocky handwriting on cheap paper. She'd read them so many times the creases were beginning to split. The first letter was formal, almost cold. I received your inquiry. Yes, I am still seeking companionship. The work is hard here. The winters are harder. If you are certain I will send fare. The second warmed slightly. You asked about my family. My parents are gone. I have no siblings now. The ranch is 640 acres, mostly grassland, some timber. I run cattle and horses. The house is simple but sound. I built it myself. I do not go to town often. People here have long memories, and I gave them much to remember. The third letter had made Ingrid cry when she read it aloud, her voice breaking on every other word. You wrote that you feel you have never fit anywhere. I understand this more than you know. I am not a small man. I am not a gentle man in appearance, though I try to be in spirit. I have been told I am frightening. I have been told worse things. But loneliness is its own kind of fear, and I would rather be honest with you than lie to make myself seem better than I am. The fourth letter contained $43 in postal notes and a single sentence. Come if you still wish to. I will be at the station. Ingrid had held that money like it was salvation itself. Then she'd gone into labor 2 days later, and salvation had turned to ash and blood, and Elsa screaming for a doctor who came too late, who could only save one of them, who looked at Elsa afterward like it was somehow her fault for being too big, too loud, too desperate to keep her sister in a world that had already decided to let her go. The baby whimpered. Elsa shifted her rocking gently and began to hum the old song. Flicken under Neumonen, the girl beneath the new moon. Their grandmother had sung it in the old language, the Swedish that tasted like pine forests and winter darkness. Ingrid had sung it to Clara every night in the charity ward, her voice getting thinner, her breathing getting harder until the singing stopped and there was only silence and a nurse saying, "We did everything we could." Elsa didn't believe that. But it didn't matter now. What mattered was the promise. What mattered was that Clara would not grow up in an institution, would not be parceled out to whoever needed a servant, Girl would not spend her childhood apologizing for existing the way Elsa had. The train shuddered, slowed. Through the window, Elsa could see lights, a handful of buildings huddled against the storm like frightened animals. Silver Creek, population 237 according to the railroad map. One church, one school, one general store. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's business and strangers were marked immediately. She gathered her carpetbag, settled Clara in the crook of her arm and stood. Her head brushed the ceiling of the train car. It always did. The familiar instinct to make herself smaller rose up, but here in Wyatt's cabin she'd started to stand straighter, started to take up the space she needed. But here, stepping down onto the platform in a town that didn't know Elsa Anderson didn't know about Thomas or the school or the accident with the student whose jaw she'd broken with an accidental elbow, here she could stand straight. Here she was, Ingrid, and Ingrid had never hurt anyone, and no one would look at her with fear or pity or disgust. The platform was empty. The station house was dark. Wind screamed across the open space, driving snow horizontal, and Elsa pulled her shawl tighter around Clara and looked for the man who was supposed to be waiting. The man who had written, "I will be at the station." The man Ingrid had chosen sight unseen because his advertisement said, "Height no obstacle," and those 3 words had meant everything. But there was no one. Elsa waited. The train pulled away, its whistle mournful and fading. The snow fell harder. The cold bit through her thin coat, the only one she owned, and Clara began to cry. Not the hungry cry or the tired cry, but the cold cry, the one that meant her small body was losing the fight against the Montana winter. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Elsa's feet went numb in her boots. Her fingers, even gloved, ached with cold. She thought about going into the station house, but the door was locked and the windows were dark and there was no smoke from the chimney. She thought about finding a hotel, but she had $8 and no idea how far that would stretch, and besides, she'd come here for a reason. She'd made a promise. So she walked. The station master, climbing down from the caboose before the train left, had pointed vaguely northeast when she asked about the McKenna Ranch. 6 miles, maybe 7. Follow the road past the church turn at the Split Oak, keep going till you see the barn. In summer, it might have been a pleasant walk. In January, in a blizzard, carrying a 6-month-old baby and a carpetbag, it was slow death. Elsa's breath frosted the air. Her lungs burned. The road disappeared under snow, and she had to guess at the direction following the dark line of fence posts. When she could see them praying, she wasn't walking in circles. Clara's crying stopped. That was worse than the crying. Elsa unbuttoned her coat, pulled the baby inside against her body, tried to share what warmth she had left. Kept walking, one foot in front of the other. The way she'd walked through the last 8 years with Thomas through the morning, she found him hanging in the barn through the inquest where they ruled it self-murder, and the priest said he couldn't be buried in consecrated ground through the whispers that followed her everywhere. He couldn't live with a wife who made him feel small. Can you imagine that poor man? What kind of woman does that to her husband? The kind who was born wrong, Elsa thought. The kind who should have been small and soft and sweet, but came out tall and hard and awkward instead. The kind God made as a warning to others. The Split Oak appeared like a ghost in the snow. Elsa turned, kept walking. The wind was at her back now, pushing her forward, and she let herself be driven like cattle toward whatever waited at the end of this frozen road. She almost missed the barn. It loomed suddenly out of the white, massive and dark, and beyond it she could just make out the shape of a house. No lights in the windows, no smoke from the chimney. But it was shelter, and shelter meant life, so Elsa stumbled toward it. The door was unlocked. It swung open under her frozen hand and she fell, more than stepped inside, into darkness that was somehow warmer than the outside, into air that smelled of old fire and coffee and something else, something wrong. Blood. She smelled blood. Elsa fumbled in her bag for matches with hands that wouldn't quite obey her. Struck one. The tiny flame showed a room simple and spare. A table, 2 chairs, a stone fireplace full of ash, and on the floor near the far wall a shape, a man's shape, unmoving. The match burned down to her fingers. She dropped it, lit another, moved closer. The man was huge, bigger than any man she'd ever seen, sprawled on his side with one leg twisted under him. In the flickering light she could see his face bearded and weathered and the fever shine of sweat on his forehead. Could see his right leg, the torn trouser, the wound dark with infection and fresh blood. He was breathing, barely. Each breath rattled in his chest like stones in a tin can. This was Wyatt McKenna. Had to be. The man Ingrid had written to. The man who was supposed to be at the station. The man who didn't know that the woman he'd been corresponding with was dead, that the baby in Elsa's arms wasn't hers, that nothing about this arrangement was what he'd agreed to. He didn't know, and he couldn't know, because if Elsa told the truth, now she'd be turned out into the storm with nowhere to go and $8 to her name and a baby who would die before morning. The truth was a luxury she couldn't afford. So she set Clara down on the table wrapped in her shawl and went to the fireplace. Found kindling and logs stacked nearby. Built a fire with hands that shook so badly she could barely hold the matches. The flames caught, grew. Heat began to fill the room and Elsa went to the man on the floor. Up close she could see how massive he truly was. His hand limp beside him was twice the size of hers. His shoulders were broader than the doorway. If he woke and decided she was a threat, there would be nothing she could do to stop him. But he didn't wake. Elsa touched his forehead and jerked back from the heat, fever burning him alive from the inside. She looked at the wound on his leg, peeled back the torn fabric, and had to swallow hard against the nausea. Infection deep and spreading. He'd tried to bandage it himself, had done a poor job, and now it was killing him. She knew what to do. Had done it before for Thomas when he cut his hand on the plow blade and was too stubborn to see a doctor. You boiled water. You cleaned the wound. You packed it with clean cloth and prayed. Elsa found a pot, filled it with snow, melted at the fire's edge. Found whiskey in a cupboard, probably meant for drinking but useful for cleaning. Found clean rags in a chest. While the water boiled, she checked on Clara. Still breathing, thank God. Still warm enough. The baby's eyes were closed, and Elsa let her sleep, turned back to the man who might die before morning if she did nothing. She cut away the bandage, cleaned the wound with whiskey and boiling water, working as gently as she could, though he groaned and thrashed, packed it with clean cloth, wrapped it tight. Her grandmother had taught her this in the old country before they came to America. Had taught her about fever, too. Cool cloths, water if he could drink. Willow bark tea if you could find it, but Elsa didn't know where anything was, in this house, didn't dare go searching in the dark. So she did what she could. Built up the fire. Found blankets, covered him. Sat beside him through the night, changing the cool cloth on his forehead when it grew warm, listening to his breathing, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. He spoke once near dawn, eyes still closed, lost in fever dreams. "Don't look at me like that, Father." His voice was deep, broken. "I'm not a weapon. I'm not. I didn't mean to." Elsa took his hand. It engulfed hers, hot and calloused. "I know," she whispered. "I know you didn't." She didn't know what she was promising, didn't know what sins this man carried, but she understood the weight of guilt, understood how it could crush you slowly year after year until you couldn't remember what it felt like to stand up straight. So she held his hand and hummed the old song, "Flickin' under knee moanin', the girl beneath the new moon." And slowly, slowly his breathing eased. The fever broke near dawn and he slept, really slept, and Elsa let herself close her eyes just for a moment. She woke to Clara crying and daylight streaming through the windows, and the man staring at her with eyes the color of dark honey, confused and wary and very much awake. "Who are you?" he said. It wasn't a question. Elsa's mind raced. The lies she'd prepared on the train, the story she'd practiced, it all tangled in her throat. She looked at this stranger whose life she'd saved, whose hand she'd held through the night, and she spoke the first and worst lie of many to come. "I'm Ingrid Nordstrom. We've been writing to each other. You sent money for the train. You said you'd be at the station." The man's face went blank. Then something like horror crossed it. "Writing," he repeated. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. "I didn't write to anyone. I didn't send any money. I don't know who you are, but you've made a mistake." The world tilted. Elsa felt the floor drop away beneath her. "No," she said. "No, I have the letters. You wrote to me. You said come if I wished. You said you'd be waiting. Show me." She pulled them from her bag with shaking hands, watched him read them, watched his face go from confusion to understanding to something darker. "These are my words," he said finally. "But I didn't write them. Not to you. I wrote them to someone named Sarah, 3 years ago, before she died. Someone," he said slowly, and his eyes went to Clara, to the baby who'd started crying again. "Someone used my words to lie to you." And Elsa understood. Ingrid. Her sister had found these letters, somehow had read them, and been so desperate for a future for her child that she'd created a fiction. Had written to this man pretending to be someone else, had forged a connection that didn't exist, had sent Elsa here to complete a deception that was unraveling before it even began. "I didn't know," Elsa whispered. "I swear I didn't know." The man looked at her for a long moment, looked at Clara, looked at the bandage on his leg, the fire still burning, the signs that someone had cared for him through the night. "You saved my life," he said finally. "That's truth. Whatever else is lies. But when the snow stops, you'll need to leave. I can't have strangers here. I can't have anyone here. Do you understand?" Elsa nodded. She understood. She understood that she'd traveled 1,800 miles on a dead woman's lie, that she had $8 and nowhere to go, that the promise she'd made was turning to ash in her hands, that once again she'd been foolish enough to hope, and hope had betrayed her the way it always did. But she didn't say any of that. She just picked up Clara and held her close and tried not to let this stranger see her cry. Outside, the Montana wind howled, and inside, 2 people who didn't belong anywhere tried to figure out how to survive the wreckage of someone else's desperate dream. The silence in the cabin was heavier than the snow piling against the walls. Elsa sat at the rough-hewn table, Clara asleep in her arms, and watched the man who called himself Wyatt McKenna try to stand. He made it halfway up before his injured leg buckled, and he went down hard, catching himself on the edge of the fireplace with a grunt that was more frustration than pain. "Stay down," Elsa said. "The wound needs time to heal." He didn't look at her, just gripped the stones until his knuckles went white. "I've been down for 3 days. That's time enough. 3 days. That explained why he hadn't been at the station, why the house was cold and dark when she arrived. He'd been here alone, bleeding, probably thinking he was going to die. And he might have if she hadn't come, if Ingrid's desperate lie hadn't brought her here. The irony wasn't lost on Elsa. She'd been deceived into saving the life of a man who wanted nothing to do with her. "You need food," she said. "When did you last eat?" Wyatt's jaw tightened. "That's not your concern. It is if you want to heal." Elsa stood, settling Clara in a nest of blankets on the table. The baby stirred but didn't wake. "I saw a larder. If you tell me what's there, I can make something." For a moment she thought he'd refuse, thought he'd order her out into the storm with nothing but pride to keep her warm. But then his shoulders sagged and he nodded toward a door at the back of the room. "Beans, salt pork, cornmeal, coffee if the mice haven't gotten to it." Elsa found them all along with a few withered potatoes and an onion sprouting green shoots. Not much, but enough. She'd learned to make meals from less during the last years with Thomas when the school board delayed her pay and his carpentry work dried up, and they lived on whatever she could stretch across a week. She built up the fire, found a pot that wasn't too dirty, started water boiling. The beans needed soaking, but there wasn't time, so she'd cook them longer, add the pork for flavor, fry the cornmeal into something like bread. It wouldn't be good, but it would be food. And food was what kept you alive when everything else failed. Wyatt watched her from the floor. She could feel his eyes tracking her movements as she worked. The way she had to duck slightly under the pot rack he'd hung too low for someone her height. The way her hands, large and capable, moved without hesitation through tasks she'd done 1,000 times. She wondered what he saw. Another woman too big for the world she inhabited, probably. Another mistake. The coffee was good, better than she expected. She poured him a cup and brought it over, had to kneel to hand it to him because he still wouldn't stand. "Thank you." His voice was quiet. He took the cup and their fingers brushed, and Elsa felt the heat of his skin. Still fevered, but not dangerously so. Not anymore. "Your leg," she said. "I should check it. Change the bandage." "No. It could get infected again. It will or it won't." His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw past the wariness to the exhaustion beneath, to the bone-deep weariness of a man who'd been alone too long. "I appreciate what you did. Truly. But I don't need anyone fussing over me. I'm not fussing. I'm trying to keep you from dying of blood poisoning. Maybe dying would be easier." The words hit like a slap. Elsa sat back on her heels. She knew that tone, had heard it in Thomas's voice during the last winter, when the darkness came early and stayed late, and he'd stand in the barn doorway staring at nothing until she came to bring him inside. Had heard it in her own voice after he died, after the priest refused him burial, after the whispers started. "Easier for who?" she said quietly. Wyatt looked away. "For everyone." The beans started to boil over. Elsa stood, went to stir them, adjusted the heat. When she turned back, Wyatt had his eyes closed. She thought he might be sleeping, but then he spoke. "The letters you have, the ones I wrote, they were for a woman named Sarah Pritchard. She lived in Helena. We met through her father. He owned the bank there. He thought a match would be advantageous, land and money joining forces. She thought it might be nice to have a husband who made her feel delicate. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's what she said. You make me feel small. Wyatt, like a real lady should feel. Like I'm something precious that needs protecting. I was stupid enough to believe that was love." "What happened?" Elsa asked. She saw who I really was, what I'm capable of. And she ran. The cabin fell quiet except for the bubble of beans and the crack of burning wood. Outside, the wind had died down. The storm was passing, which meant Elsa's time here was running out. Soon the roads would clear. Soon she'd have to leave with Clara and $8 and nowhere to go. But she wasn't thinking about that. She was thinking about the pain in Wyatt's voice, the self-loathing, the familiar weight of it. "What did you do?" she asked. Wyatt opened his eyes. "Nothing I can take back." He didn't elaborate. Elsa didn't push. She understood about secrets, about things too heavy to speak aloud. She had her own. Thomas swinging from the barn rafter, the note in his pocket that said, "I can't be the small one anymore." The way the sheriff had looked at her like she was a murderer, like her existence had driven a man to death. The food was ready. She filled 2 bowls, brought him one, sat across from him on the floor, because there was nowhere else to sit that didn't feel like she was looming over him. They ate in silence. The beans were undercooked and the salt pork was too salty, but Wyatt ate every bite and asked for more. "It's good," he said. "I haven't had a real meal in weeks. This isn't real. This is survival. Same thing most days." Clara woke crying. Elsa set down her bowl and went to the baby, but Wyatt spoke before she got there. "Is she yours?" Again, not a question. Elsa's hands stilled. This was the moment. She could tell the truth now. Could say no. "She's my sister's child. My sister who died, who lied to you, who created this whole mess." Could lay it all bare and accept whatever came next. But then Clara's cry turned to a wail, that desperate infant sound that meant hunger, and Elsa thought about the orphanage in St. Paul, the gray walls, the children in their gray dresses, the matron who'd said, "We'll take her, but you should know we rarely place infants. They usually stay until they're old enough for service work." "Yes," Elsa lied. "She's mine." "Where's the father?" "Dead." The first truth she'd spoken. Thomas was dead. That much wasn't a lie. Wyatt nodded slowly. "So you came here alone, with a baby. Because of letters you thought I wrote. I had nowhere else to go." The admission cost her. Elsa hated showing weakness, hated the vulnerability of it. But there was no point in pretending now. He knew she was desperate, knew she'd been deceived, knew she was trapped here until the weather cleared. "I can pay you," she added quickly, "for room and board, until I can make other arrangements. I have $8. Wyatt's expression shifted. Something that might have been pity crossed his face, and Elsa's spine straightened. She didn't want his pity, didn't want anyone's pity. She wanted to survive to keep Clara safe, to fulfill the promise she'd made to Ingrid. That was all. "Keep your money." His voice was gruff. "You saved my life. I won't throw you out in the snow, but when it clears, you'll need to go. I can't have anyone here. Do you understand why?" "No," Elsa said honestly. "But I understand you want to be alone. I understand that better than you might think." She fed Clara with the goat's milk she found in the cold cellar warmed by the fire. The baby ate hungrily and fell back asleep, and Elsa wrapped her carefully and laid her in a drawer she pulled from the dresser lined with a spare blanket. It wasn't a cradle, but it would do. When she turned around, Wyatt was trying to stand again. This time he made it all the way up, leaning heavily against the wall, his face gray with effort. "What are you doing?" Elsa demanded. "Checking the stock. The horses need feeding. The cattle need water. In your condition, you can barely walk. They don't care about my condition. They care about eating. I'll do it. You don't know how. Then tell me." They stared at each other across the small room. Two stubborn people, both too proud to bend, both carrying weight that would break someone smaller. Finally, Wyatt's mouth twitched. It might have been a smile, might have been pain. "Barns 50 yards north. You'll see it when the snow stops. Hay's in the loft, 2 flakes per horse. Water trough needs breaking. If it's frozen, there's an axe by the door. Cattle are in the far pasture, but they should be fine. They're tough breeds." "How many horses?" "4. 3 saddle horses and 1 draft mare. She's pregnant, due in spring. Don't startle her." Elsa nodded. "Anything else?" Wyatt hesitated. "Then check the chicken coop. East side of the barn. If any of them are still alive, they'll need grain. And there might be eggs." When the snow thinned enough to see, Elsa bundled herself in every layer she could find. Wyatt's coat massive on her but warm. His gloves too big but better than nothing. A scarf wrapped around her face until only her eyes showed. Clara was still sleeping, and Wyatt promised he'd watch her, though the promise came reluctantly, like he was afraid of what it might mean. The cold hit like a fist. Elsa pushed through it, following the path of disturbed snow that must have been Wyatt's tracks from 3 days ago. The barn was huge, built for serious ranching, and when she pulled open the door, the smell of hay and horses washed over her. Warm, alive. 4 heads turned to look at her. The horses nickered softly, and Elsa felt something in her chest ease. She'd never worked with horses before, but she'd read about them, had always wanted to learn. Now she had no choice. She climbed to the loft, found the hay, dropped it down. Fed each horse carefully, talking to them in Swedish the way her grandmother had talked to the neighbor's cow. The draft mare, massive and gentle, let Elsa touch her swollen belly. Spring, Wyatt had said. New life coming, if they all survived that long. The water trough was frozen solid. Elsa found the axe heavy and well-balanced and swung it hard. The ice cracked. She swung again and again. By the time she'd cleared enough for the horses to drink, her arms were shaking and sweat ran down her back despite the cold. The chicken coop was a surprise. She'd expected carnage, frozen birds, and scattered feathers. Instead, she found 6 hens huddled together in a nest box, alive and alert. They scattered when she entered, then came cautiously back when she scattered grain. And in the nest box, impossibly, were 3 eggs, fresh and perfect and still warm. Elsa held them carefully in her gloved hands and felt tears sting her eyes. 3 eggs. Such a small thing. But they meant Wyatt had been planning to survive, had been caring for these animals even while infection poisoned his blood, had been fighting to stay alive even when dying might be easier. She carried them back to the cabin like precious stones. Wyatt was sitting at the table when she returned Clara in his arms. The sight stopped Elsa in the doorway. This massive man, scarred and rough, holding a 6-month-old baby with a gentleness that seemed impossible given his size. He was humming something tuneless and low, and Clara was watching him with wide, dark eyes. He looked up when Elsa entered, set Clara down quickly like he'd been caught doing something shameful. "The horses are fed," Elsa said. "Water's clear. And I found these." She set the eggs on the table. 3 hens survived. Something shifted in Wyatt's expression. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. He picked up one egg, turned it over in his palm. His hand dwarfed it. "I thought they'd be dead," he said quietly. "I tried to get to them before the fever got bad, but I couldn't make it that far. They're tougher than they look." "Yes." He set the egg down carefully. They would have to be to survive out here. The words hung in the air between them. Elsa knew he wasn't just talking about chickens. She made eggs for breakfast, scrambled with the last of the onion. Fresh coffee. Wyatt ate slowly, and she noticed he was watching her again. Not with suspicion this time. With something else. Curiosity, perhaps. Or the beginning of trust. "You know how to work," he said finally. Most women who answered those kinds of advertisements, they're looking for easy lives. Husbands to take care of them. "You're not like that. I've never had an easy life." Elsa met his eyes. "And I've never expected anyone to take care of me. Because of your height." It wasn't a question, but Elsa answered anyway. "Because of everything. I'm too tall, too strong, too much. I learned early that the world doesn't have space for women like me. So I made my own space. By becoming a what? Before this? A teacher. In Chicago." She didn't mention the dismissal, the broken jaw, the way the school board had looked at her like she was dangerous. Some things didn't need saying. What happened? The same thing that always happens. I didn't fit. They made sure I knew it. She stood, began clearing the dishes. "But I'm good at starting over. I've had practice." Wyatt watched her work. "Then the baby. She looks like you." The lie stuck in Elsa's throat. She forced it out. "She has her father's coloring. But your eyes. And your hands when you hold her. You're careful but not afraid. Like you've done it before." Elsa's heart pounded. "She's mine," she said firmly. "Whatever else you think that's true." It wasn't true, but it needed to be. For Clara's sake, for the promise she'd made, for the hope that somewhere in this frozen wasteland she might be able to build something that lasted. Wyatt was quiet for a long time. Then he pushed himself to standing steadier now and limped to the window. The storm had passed. Blue sky showed between breaking clouds. The world outside was white and bright and painfully beautiful. "Roads will clear in a day or two," he said. "Maybe less. Then you can go." "Where?" "That's not my problem." The words were harsh, but his voice wasn't. Elsa heard the conflict in it, the desire to help warring with the need to protect himself. She understood that too. "I have $8, she said again. "I can find work somewhere. A town that needs a teacher maybe, or a housekeeper. Someone will hire me. With a baby. In winter. In Montana Territory." Wyatt turned from the window. "You'll be dead in a week. Then what would you have me do?" "Stay." The word came out rough, like it hurt to say. "Stay until spring. Work for your keep. I need help with the ranch, and I can't do it alone, not with this leg. You need a place to survive the winter. It's practical, nothing more. And in spring we go our separate ways. You find somewhere else to be. I go back to being alone. We forget this ever happened." Elsa looked at him. At this broken man in his broken house offering her survival with one hand while pushing her away with the other. She thought about saying no. About gathering her pride and her $8 and walking into certain death rather than accepting charity. But then Clara made a small sound in her sleep, and Elsa remembered. This wasn't about pride. It was about keeping a promise to a dead woman who'd loved her daughter enough to lie, to deceive, to do whatever it took to give her child a chance. "All right," Elsa said. "Until spring. Nothing more." They shook hands on it, and Wyatt's hand swallowed hers whole. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, Elsa didn't feel small. She felt like she'd just made a bargain that might save her life, or destroy what was left of it. Outside, the Montana sun climbed higher, and inside the cabin, two strangers who'd found each other through deception began the slow work of learning to survive together without asking too many questions about why fate had been cruel enough or kind enough to bring them to this moment. 8 weeks passed like water through cupped hands. January became February, and the Montana winter settled in with the patience of something that knew it couldn't be rushed or reasoned with. The snow fell, the wind howled, and in the small cabin on the McKenna ranch, two people learned the careful choreography of coexistence. Elsa woke before dawn every morning, not because she wanted to, but because Clara woke, and Clara's needs were the clock by which everything else was measured. Feed the baby, change the baby, rock the baby back to sleep. Then, in the quiet hour before Wyatt stirred, Elsa would sit by the window and watch the sky lighten from black to gray to that peculiar blue-white that meant more snow was coming. She'd started keeping a journal. Nothing elaborate, just a few lines each day in the back pages of a book she'd found on Wyatt's shelf. Paradise lost, water damaged, and spine broken, half the pages missing. She wrote in the margins tiny neat script that wouldn't waste space. Day 43. Wyatt's leg is healing. He can walk without limping now, though he still favors it when he thinks I'm not watching. 3 eggs today. The roan mare is getting close to her time. She didn't write about the other things. The way Wyatt would sometimes stand in the doorway and stare at the mountains like he was looking for someone who'd never come back. The nightmares that woke him gasping, though he never spoke of them. The locked room she'd discovered that first night, the one he'd forbidden her from entering, though she'd heard him in there sometimes late at night moving things around with a carefulness that suggested either great value or great pain. Some things weren't meant to be written down. Some things were too private even for the margins of a ruined book. Wyatt emerged from his small bedroom as the coffee began to boil. He'd grown a fuller beard over the weeks, dark shot through with gray, and it made him look older, harder. But his eyes, when they met hers across the cabin, were softer than they'd been that first morning. Not warm exactly, but no longer wary. "Morning," he said. His voice was rough with sleep. "Morning." Elsa poured him coffee without asking. They'd fallen into this pattern weeks ago. She made coffee. He drank it black 2 cups before he'd speak more than necessary. She'd learned not to talk during this time, not to intrude on whatever mental preparation he needed to face another day of existing. She made porridge from the oats they'd found in the larder, sweetened with a little molasses. Wyatt ate methodically the way he did everything. No wasted motion, no unnecessary words. When he finished, he stood and began pulling on layers. Wool shirt, leather vest, heavy coat, gloves. "I'll check the cattle," he said. "North fence needs mending. Probably take most of the day. I'll come with you." He paused, one arm in his coat sleeve. "No need. You should stay with the baby. Clara sleeps for hours in the morning. Wrap her warm, she'll be fine. And you shouldn't be lifting fence posts alone, not with your leg still healing. It's healed. Then you won't mind the help." They stared at each other. This had become another pattern. Wyatt would try to do everything alone. Elsa would insist on helping. He'd resist. She'd persist. Eventually he'd give in, but only after making it clear he didn't need her assistance, he was just tolerating it. "Fine," he said, "but dress warm. It's cold out there. It's Montana in February. It's cold everywhere." Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone, and he was turning away, gathering tools from the lean-to beside the fireplace. They bundled Clara in every soft thing they could find, settled her in a basket packed with warm stones from the fire's edge. The baby slept through it all, her small face peaceful. Elsa watched Wyatt. Watching Clara, saw the way his expression shifted when he looked at her. Something tender, something that looked like longing. She'd noticed it before. The way he'd hold Clara when Elsa asked him to, the way he'd touch her tiny hands with fingers so large they could crush her without effort, but never did. The way he'd hum that tuneless melody, the one that seemed to come from somewhere deep and buried. Once she'd asked him if he liked children. He'd gone very still, then said, "I had a sister once. She's gone now." And he'd handed Clara back and walked outside into a snowstorm, stayed there until dark. Elsa hadn't asked again. The north pasture was a 2-mile walk. They took the draft horse, the pregnant mare Wyatt called Goliath, with a kind of ironic affection. Elsa rode behind him, Clara's basket strapped between them, and tried not to think about how close they were, how she could feel the warmth of his back through the layers, how this was the nearest she'd been to another person, really been since Thomas died. No, she wouldn't think about Thomas, wouldn't let his ghost into this cold morning. The fence was worse than Wyatt had said. 3 posts down wire scattered across frozen ground. Something had hit it hard, probably a bull during the last storm, panicked and running blind. They'd be lucky if they didn't find a carcass somewhere in the snow. Wyatt dismounted, began gathering tools. Elsa slid down, settled Clara's basket in a sheltered spot near a boulder, then turned to help. But Wyatt was already hauling a post from Goliath's packs, and she saw him wince when he bent to set it. "Let me," she said, and took the post before he could argue. It was heavy good pine, but she'd lifted heavier things, had spent years moving furniture in the schoolhouse boxes of books her own trunk when Thomas refused to help. She knew how to use her strength, how to leverage and balance and lift without straining. Wyatt watched her plant the post, his expression unreadable. Then he picked up another one and moved to the next gap. They worked in silence, the only sounds the crunch of snow, the clink of tools, the occasional snort from Goliath. After an hour, Elsa's hands ached even through gloves. After 2 hours, sweat ran down her back despite the cold. But the fence was mending. Post by post, wire by wire, they were making something broken whole again. "You're stronger than you look," Wyatt said. It was the first thing he'd said in hours. "I look pretty strong. That's not what I meant." Elsa straightened, stretching her back. "Then what did you mean?" He was quiet for a moment, hammering a nail with precise strikes. "Most women I've known, they'd complain about this kind of work. Call it men's work, say it wasn't proper. I'm not most women." "No, you're not." He looked at her, then really looked at her, and Elsa felt something shift in the air between them. "You don't make yourself small." Elsa's throat tightened. "I spent 34 years making myself small. Bending, hunching, apologizing for taking up space. I'm done with that." "What changed?" "My husband died." The words came out flat, matter of fact. Wyatt's hammer stilled. "I'm sorry. Don't be. He wanted me to be something I wasn't. Someone delicate and soft and easy to protect. But I'm not delicate. I'm not soft. And I don't need protecting." She gripped the fence post hard enough that the rough wood bit through her gloves. He couldn't live with that. So he found a way to leave. Wyatt was very quiet. Then how? Elsa had never said it aloud. Not to the sheriff, not to the priest, not to anyone who'd asked. But here in the middle of a frozen pasture with this man who understood what it meant to carry guilt, the words came. "He hanged himself in our barn. Left a note that said, 'I can't be the small one anymore.' The priest said it was self-murder, refused to bury him in consecrated ground. The town said it was my fault for being what I am, for making him feel less than a man just by existing. And what do you say?" Elsa looked out at the mountains, at the endless white, at the sky so blue it hurt. "I say he was sick in a way I couldn't heal. I say I loved him as much as I was capable of loving someone I barely knew. I say I'm sorry he suffered, but I'm not sorry I survived him." Wyatt nodded slowly. "That's honest. More honest than most people can manage." "What about you?" Elsa turned to face him fully. "You said you wrote those letters to someone named Sarah. What happened to her?" For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down his hammer and pulled off his gloves, flexed his hands like they ached. "Sarah Pritchard wasn't just someone I wrote to. She was my fiancée. We were going to be married." "What stopped you?" "I did." He looked at his hands, those massive scarred hands that could break bones or cradle an infant with equal ease. 9 years ago there was a fire in town. Barn fire started in the hayloft. 3 people trapped inside. I heard the screaming, ran in. Got one out, a little girl. Went back for the others." He stopped, started again. "The smoke was too thick. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. I found the door, got my hands on it, started pulling, but it was stuck, jammed somehow. I pulled harder, heard the wood splinter, and then someone was there beside me helping, and the door came open and we fell out into the snow." "Who else got out?" Elsa asked quietly. "No one. By the time we got the door open, they were gone. The smoke, the heat, it was too fast. We tried to go back in, but the whole structure collapsed. 2 people died in that fire, and I couldn't save them because I wasn't strong enough or fast enough or smart enough to get that door open in time. But you tried. You got 1 person out. I got a child out. Her mother and aunt died. Wyatt's voice went flat. One of those women was Anna, my sister, my baby sister who was 19 years old and pregnant and counting on me to protect her. The world seemed to stop. Elsa stood very still, watching comprehension dawn like a sickness. Sarah was with me at the fire, Wyatt continued. Saw me screaming Anna's name, saw me trying to run back in even after the roof fell. And later, after they'd pulled the bodies out after the funerals, she came to me and said she couldn't marry me. Said she'd seen something in my eyes that scared her. Something violent and desperate and too much. She said when I pulled on that door when it wouldn't open, my face was like an animal's. She said she realized that if I ever turned that fury on her, she'd have no chance. That a man my size with that kind of rage was too dangerous to tie her life to. He laughed, hollow and bitter. The funny thing is she was right. I am dangerous. Not because I want to be, but because when I lose control, when I feel something too strongly, my size makes it a weapon. I can't just be angry. I can't just be desperate. Everything I feel is magnified by what I am. That's why you live alone, Elsa said. Why you don't go to town. Why you wanted me to leave. That's why I need to be alone. It's safer. For everyone. Clara chose that moment to wake her small cry cutting through the cold air. Elsa went to her, lifted her from the basket, felt the tiny solid weight of her. This child who depended on her. This lie she was living to keep a promise to a dead woman. She's not really yours, is she? Elsa's heart stopped. She turned slowly. Wyatt was watching her with those patient brown eyes, and she knew. Somehow he knew. What makes you say that? She managed. Because I've been alone for 9 years. 9 years of watching, listening, learning to read people from a distance because I couldn't get close. And I can see the fear in your eyes every time I look at her. Not the fear of a mother. The fear of someone who's terrified they'll fail at something they've promised to do. Elsa's hands shook. She held Clara tighter. Tell me, Wyatt said gently. Whatever it is, tell me the truth. I've been lied to before. I can handle it. But I can't handle more silence, more secrets. Not if we're going to survive this winter together. And Elsa realized she was tired. So tired of carrying the weight of deception, tired of looking over her shoulder, tired of being afraid that one wrong word would destroy everything. So she told him about Ingrid, about the pregnancy out of wedlock, about the man who promised to marry her then disappeared, about the charity ward where her sister died bleeding and alone except for Elsa holding her hand, about the promise, about the orphanage that would take Clara but couldn't guarantee she'd be placed in a good home, about finding the letters the ones Ingrid had somehow obtained had used to create a fiction of a mail-order bride arrangement that never existed. She used your words, Elsa whispered. From the letters you wrote to Sarah. She copied them, changed enough details to make it seem like you were writing to her. She was desperate. She wanted her daughter to have a father, a home, something better than what she'd had. And you came in her place. I had nowhere else to go, no money, no prospects. And I'd promised. So I became Ingrid. I took her name, her story, and I came here to give Clara what her mother wanted for her. Wyatt was very quiet. The wind had picked up, blowing snow in small spirals across the frozen ground. Finally he spoke. What was your real name? Before. Elsa Anderson. I was a teacher in Chicago. I was dismissed after an accident. A student was injured. It wasn't my fault, but I was too easy to blame. Too obviously different. So I left. And your husband, Thomas. He was real. He was real, and his death was real, and the guilt I carry is real. She looked down at Clara, at those dark eyes watching her. But this child is real too, and my promise to her mother is the only thing I have left that means anything. The silence stretched between them like the miles of white pasture. Elsa waited for anger, for accusations, for the order to leave that she'd been dreading since she arrived. Instead, Wyatt picked up his hammer. We should finish this fence before the snow gets worse, he said. Storm's coming in tonight. Elsa stared at him. That's it? You're not angry? I've been angry for 9 years. It doesn't change anything. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw understanding, saw the reflection of her own pain. You did what you had to do for a child who needed you. I understand that better than you think. But I lied to you. Yes, you did. And maybe when spring comes, when you leave, I'll be angry about it. But right now it's February, it's Montana, and we have work to do." He turned back to the fence, and after a moment Elsa did too. They worked until the light began to fail, until Clara fussed with hunger, until the first flakes of new snow began to fall. Then they packed up their tools and rode back to the cabin through the gathering storm. That night, after Clara was fed and sleeping, after they'd eaten a simple supper in comfortable silence, Wyatt pulled a book from his shelf. Jane Eyre, worn and well-loved. Anna's favorite, he said quietly. She taught herself to read with this book. Made me read it aloud to her every night for a year until I learned too. He held it out to Elsa. "I thought maybe you could read some. It's been a long time since I heard the story." So Elsa read. By firelight, with the snow falling outside and the warmth of the cabin wrapping around them like a blanket, she read about another orphan, another woman who didn't fit, another story of finding home in unexpected places. And when she glanced up between chapters, she saw Wyatt watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Not trust, not yet, but something softer than suspicion, something that might, given time, become understanding. Outside, the Montana winter howled, but inside, two people who'd found each other through lies were beginning to build something true. Neither of them knew yet about the letter that would arrive in 3 weeks. Neither knew about Judge Harlan, about the debt that was coming due, about the choice that would force them to decide whether survival was enough or whether they wanted something more. For now, there was just the story and the fire and the slow thaw of two frozen hearts learning to feel again. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in early March, carried by a rider who wouldn't dismount, wouldn't meet Wyatt's eyes, just handed over the envelope and spurred his horse back toward town like he was fleeing something contagious. Elsa watched from the cabin window as Wyatt stood in the yard, turning the envelope over in his hands. Official paper, wax seal, the kind of correspondence that never brought good news. She saw his shoulders tense, saw him slip the letter into his coat pocket without opening it, saw him stand there for a long moment staring at the mountains before he finally turned back toward the house. He didn't mention it at breakfast, didn't mention it while they worked through the morning chores, but Elsa could feel it like a weight in the room, this unopened thing that had changed the air between them. She'd learned to read him over the past weeks, learned the small signs, the tightness in his jaw, the way his hands would flex and release, the silence that was different from his usual quiet. By afternoon, she couldn't stand it anymore. "Are you going to tell me what it says?" she asked. They were in the barn mucking stalls while Clara slept in her basket nearby. "Or are we going to pretend that letter doesn't exist?" Wyatt's shovel paused mid-stroke. "Haven't opened it yet." "Why not?" "Because I know who it's from, and I know what it'll say. Opening it won't change anything." "Then tell me who it's from." Wyatt leaned on his shovel, and in the dim barn light, Elsa saw how tired he looked. Not physically tired, soul tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying too much for too long. "Judge Marcus Harlan," he said finally, "brother of Pastor James Harlan, the man whose sister died in the fire with Anna." Elsa's stomach tightened. What does he want? What he's always wanted. Proof that I'm responsible for his brother's death. Evidence he can use to see me hanged. The shovel fell from Elsa's hands, clattering against the barn floor. "What are you talking about?" Wyatt didn't look at her, just kept staring at nothing, his eyes focused on something 9 years past. "After the fire, after Sarah left, Pastor James came to see me. Said he wanted to talk about Anna, about what happened. I thought he was offering condolences, maybe, or coming to blame me, which I deserved." He paused. Elsa waited. But that's not what he wanted. He wanted to confess. Said he needed someone to know the truth before it ate him alive. Wyatt's voice went flat, emotionless, the way it did when he talked about things that hurt too much to feel. Anna was pregnant when she died, 4 months along. The father was Pastor James. The words hit like a fist. Elsa grabbed the stall rail to steady herself. He'd been courting her in secret, promised to marry her. But when she told him about the baby, he panicked, said it would destroy his reputation, ruin his career. He told Anna to get rid of it, offered her money to go away. When she refused, when she said she'd tell everyone the truth, he threatened her. Threatened how? Said he'd make sure no one believed her, that he'd say she was a whore who tried to trap him, that he'd have her committed to an asylum for moral degeneracy. Wyatt's hands gripped the shovel handle so hard the wood creaked. Anna was terrified. Trapped. She didn't know what to do. So she came to me, asked if she could stay at the ranch until she figured things out. "That's why she was at the fire?" Elsa said quietly. "She was staying with you. She'd been here 3 days. I didn't know about the baby, didn't know about James. She just said she needed time away from town, needed space to think. I said yes. Of course I said yes. She was my sister." He stopped, swallowed hard. "I should have asked more questions. Should have seen how scared she was. Should have done something. You couldn't have known. But James knew. He knew where she was. And after the fire, after Anna died, he came to me and confessed everything. Said he'd caused it. Not directly, not with his own hands. But he'd driven her to desperation. He said Anna had written him a letter the day before the fire saying she was going to tell everyone the truth. Going to stand up in church and name him as the father. So he came to the barn that night," Elsa said, understanding dawning. "To stop her." "No." Wyatt's voice was hollow. "He didn't come. He was too much of a coward for that. He just sent her a reply. A letter. I found it in Anna's room after she died, hidden under her mattress. It said, 'If you speak, I'll make sure everyone knows what you really are. I'll have you declared insane. They'll take the baby when it's born. You'll never see it again. Do what's right, Anna. End this before it's too late.'" "End this," Elsa whispered. "Oh, God." The fire started in the hayloft, where Anna slept. The marshal ruled it an accident, a lantern tipped over. "But I've always wondered." Wyatt's eyes were distant, seeing something Elsa couldn't. If she was desperate enough, scared enough, if she thought there was no way out. "You think she started it herself?" "I think James Harlan gave her a choice between shame and death. And I think my sister was 19 and alone and terrified, and she made the only choice she thought she had left." The barn was very quiet. Even the horses had stopped moving, as if they could sense the weight of this confession. "What did you do?" Elsa asked. "When James told you this?" Wyatt finally looked at her. "I told him to leave my property. Told him if I ever saw him again, I wouldn't be responsible for what happened. He left. 3 days later, he stood up in church and confessed everything. Every detail, the affair, the pregnancy, the threats, the letter. He said he'd driven Anna to her death and he couldn't live with it anymore. Then he went home, wrote a note asking God's forgiveness, and shot himself in his study. His housekeeper found him the next morning. Elsa's hand went to her mouth. His brother Marcus was a circuit judge in Helena at the time. When he heard what happened, he came back to Silver Creek, stood at James's funeral, and announced that his brother had been driven to confession and suicide by Wyatt McKenna. Said I'd threatened him, coerced him, used my size and my rage to terrorize a man of God until he broke. But you didn't. No. But who was going to believe that the town had already decided I was dangerous after the fire? After Sarah spread the story about my face when I couldn't save Anna. It was easy to believe I'd gone to James, demanded answers, frightened him into confession and death. Wyatt picked up his shovel again, began working mechanically. Marcus couldn't prove it, had no evidence. But he swore he'd find some. Swore he'd see me hang for killing his brother even if it took the rest of his life. That was 9 years ago. Every few years he comes back, asks questions, digs into my past, tries to find something, anything he can use against me. And now he's sent a letter, Elsa said. Now he's sent a letter. Open it. Wyatt shook his head. I know what it'll say. That he's back in Silver Creek. That he's reopening the investigation into James's death. That he has new evidence, new witnesses, new reasons to believe I'm guilty of murder or coercion or whatever he can make stick. It's always the same. Then why are you afraid of it? Because this time he might actually have something. Wyatt's eyes met hers. This time there's you. Elsa's blood went cold. Me, a woman using a false name, living on my property, claiming to be someone she's not. Marcus will see that as evidence of criminal behavior. He'll twist it, make it seem like I'm running some kind of operation here, harboring fugitives, engaging in fraud. It won't matter that the truth is complicated. All that will matter is that it looks bad. I'll leave, Elsa said immediately. Tonight. I'll take Clara and go. You can say I was never here, that the writer was mistaken. And go where? With what money? Wyatt's voice was gentle but firm. It's March. You'd freeze before you made it to Helena. And even if you didn't, where would you go? What would you tell people when they asked about Clara? I'll figure something out. No. Wyatt set down his shovel. I've run from Marcus Harlan for 9 years. I've hidden. I've avoided town. I've made myself smaller and quieter and less visible, hoping he'd lose interest. It hasn't worked. It's never going to work. Then what do you want to do? I want to read the damn letter, find out what he knows. And then I want to decide if I'm going to keep running or if I'm finally going to stand still and face him. He pulled the envelope from his coat, broke the seal with hands that were almost steady. Elsa watched his eyes move across the page, watched his expression harden, watched something like resignation settle over his features. He's here, Wyatt said quietly. Elsa watched the color drain from his face as he read. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly. She'd seen this look before on Thomas's face when the darkness came for him. The look of a man questioning every memory, every certainty. "Wyatt," she said softly. He didn't seem to hear her. His eyes scanned the letter again as if reading it twice might change the words. He says he has 3 witnesses. Men who claim they saw me at James's house the night before he died. Men who say I threatened to make him pay for what he'd done. Did you go to his house? I don't... Wyatt's voice cracked. I don't remember. That whole week after Anna died is a blur. I was drinking. I wasn't sleeping. I might have gone there. I might have said anything. This was what Harlan wanted Elsa realized, not proof doubt. The slow poison of uncertainty. In Silver Creek. Has been for a week, asking questions, talking to old-timers who remember the fire, looking for anyone who might have information about my relationship with James. And he wants to see you. He's demanding to see me. Says if I don't come to town within 3 days, he'll consider it evidence of guilt and issue a warrant for my arrest. Says he has witnesses who claim I threatened James publicly before his death. Wants to question me under oath. Did you threaten him publicly? I told him to stay away from me. Does that count as a threat? It might. To someone looking for excuses. Elsa's mind raced. What if I went instead? Absolutely not. What if I went to town, told Judge Harlan the truth, that I'm here of my own accord, that you've done nothing wrong, that whatever he thinks he knows is based on misunderstanding? He'll ask who you are, why you're using a false name, how you came to be here. Wyatt's voice was firm. And when you can't answer those questions without admitting to fraud and deception, he'll use that against both of us. You'll make it worse, not better. Then we need a better story. We need the truth. The truth will destroy me, Elsa said quietly. The truth means admitting I'm not who I claim to be, that Clara isn't mine, that I came here under false pretenses. At best, I'll be arrested for fraud. At worst, they'll take Clara and put her in an orphanage, and I'll have broken my promise to Ingrid. And lying more will help this, how I don't know. Elsa turned away, pressing her hands to her face. I don't know. I just know I can't lose her. I can't fail at this. It's the only thing I have left that matters. She felt Wyatt's hand on her shoulder, gentle despite its size. You have more than that. Do I? You have this place. For now. You have work. You have safety. You have someone who knows the truth and hasn't turned you away. Elsa turned to look at him. Why haven't you turned me away? You could have weeks ago, when you figured it out. Why did you let me stay? Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. Because I know what it's like to make promises to the dead, to carry their weight, to feel like failing them means you failed at the only thing that gave your life meaning. Anna. And my mother before her. And my father, who made me promise I'd take care of this ranch, keep the McKenna name alive. I've broken most of those promises. But I understand why you can't break yours. So what do? We go to town, Wyatt said. Together. We face Marcus Harlan, and we tell him enough of the truth to satisfy him without destroying you. What truth? That you answered an advertisement, that there was confusion about the correspondence but we've reached an understanding, that you work here as a housekeeper in exchange for room and board, that Clara is your daughter and you're a widow trying to make a fresh start. It's not the whole truth, but it's not entirely a lie either. He'll ask questions. Let him. I've had 9 years to prepare for this. You just have to remember one thing. Wyatt's eyes held hers. Don't let him see you're afraid. Men like Marcus, they feed on fear. They use it like a weapon. If you show him you're scared, he'll know he's found something to exploit. I am scared. I know. So am I. But we don't have to show him that. Clara woke then, her small cry cutting through the tension. Elsa went to her, lifted her from the basket, felt the warm, solid weight of her. This child who depended on her, this promise she'd made, this life she'd tried to build from lies and desperation. When do we leave? She asked. Tomorrow morning. Early. We'll take the wagon, be in town by noon. Wyatt's jaw set. Whatever happens, whatever Marcus says or does, we face it together. Agreed. Agreed. That night Elsa couldn't sleep. She lay in her small room listening to the wind and the creak of the cabin settling and thought about all the ways this could go wrong. Thought about Judge Harlan discovering the truth. Thought about losing Clara. Thought about Wyatt, this man who'd shown her more kindness than she deserved, being destroyed because he'd been fool enough to trust her. She thought about running, taking Clara and disappearing into the night. It would be easier, cleaner. Wyatt could tell Harlan she'd left, that he'd known nothing about her deceptions. He'd be safe. But the cabin was warm, and Clara was sleeping peacefully, and Elsa was so tired of running. So she stayed. And when dawn came gray and cold, she dressed carefully in her best dress, the one she'd worn to Thomas's funeral. Brushed her hair until it shone. Made herself look respectable, unremarkable, like a woman with nothing to hide. Wyatt was already up hitching Goliath to the wagon. He'd shaved, trimmed his beard, put on clothes that weren't patched or worn. He looked almost civilized, almost like a man who belonged in polite society. Almost. Ready? He asked. No, Elsa said honestly, but that's never stopped me before. They rode toward Silver Creek in silence, Clara bundled between them. The town appeared on the horizon like a judgment, small and mean and full of watching eyes. And somewhere in those buildings, Judge Marcus Harlan was waiting. Waiting to destroy them both. Or waiting to give them a chance to prove that sometimes the truth was complicated enough to save you. Elsa gripped Clara tighter and prayed she'd know the difference when the time came. Silver Creek looked like every other frontier town Elsa had ever seen. One main street, dirt packed hard by wagon wheels and horse hooves. Buildings that leaned slightly as if exhausted by the effort of staying upright through Montana winters. A church with a white steeple. A saloon with paint peeling from its false front. A general store with windows so dusty the goods inside were just shadows. And people. People who stopped what they were doing to stare as Wyatt's wagon rolled down the street. A woman gathering her children close as if proximity to the McKenna wagon might contaminate them. A man spitting tobacco juice and turning his back deliberately. A shopkeeper coming to his door, arms crossed, face hard. Elsa had seen these looks before. In Chicago, after Thomas died, the way people would cross the street to avoid her, the way conversations would stop when she entered a room, the way an entire community could decide you were guilty of something without ever saying what. She sat straighter, lifted her chin. Let them look. The courthouse was the largest building in town, 2 stories of stone and timber with shutters painted government green. Wyatt pulled the wagon to a stop in front of it, set the brake, and sat for a moment without moving. "You don't have to do this," Elsa said quietly. "Yes, I do." He climbed down, came around to help her. His hand was steady when he took hers, solid and warm, and for just a moment, Elsa let herself lean into that steadiness. Let herself pretend she wasn't alone. Then she gathered Clara and followed him up the courthouse steps. Inside the building smelled of old wood and older tobacco. A clerk sat at a desk, young and nervous-looking, and when he saw Wyatt his eyes went wide. "Mr. McKenna," the clerk's voice cracked. "Judge Harlan is expecting you. Second floor, last door on the right." They climbed the stairs. Elsa's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd faced school boards and sheriffs and priests who looked at her like she was something unnatural. But this felt different. This felt like walking into a trap where the only question was how badly you'd be hurt when it closed. The door at the end of the hall stood open. Inside, a man sat behind a massive desk, reading papers through spectacles perched on a narrow nose. He looked up as they entered, and Elsa saw him take in everything in one sharp glance. Wyatt's size, her height, Clara in her arms, the way they stood close but not touching, protective but uncertain. "Wyatt McKenna," the man said. His voice was cultured, educated, with the faint remnants of a southern accent. "Thank you for accepting my invitation." "It wasn't an invitation," Wyatt said. "It was a summons." Semantics. Judge Marcus Harlan set down his papers and stood. He was tall but not unusually so slender, well-dressed in city clothes that looked out of place in Silver Creek. Everything about him spoke of refinement, civilization, control. And his eyes, when they settled on Elsa, were cold as January ice. "And this must be the mysterious woman living at your ranch, the one whose arrival has caused such interesting speculation in town." "This is Mrs. Anderson," Wyatt said. "She works as my housekeeper. There's nothing mysterious about it." "Mrs. Anderson." Harlan's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "How curious. You see, I took the liberty of making some inquiries. Sent telegrams to Chicago, where a woman named Elsa Anderson was employed as a school teacher until 6 months ago. The same Elsa Anderson whose husband Thomas took his own life 3 years prior." Elsa's throat went dry. "I also inquired about mail-order bride arrangements. Contacted several matrimonial agencies. None of them had any record of a woman named Ingrid Nordstrom corresponding with Wyatt McKenna." Harlan stepped around his desk, moving with deliberate slowness. "But they did have records of a woman by that name who died in childbirth in St. Paul, Minnesota. 7 months ago." He paused, letting the words settle like stones. "So you'll understand my confusion, Mrs. Anderson. Are you the dead school teacher's widow from Chicago? Or the dead woman from St. Paul? Or perhaps someone else entirely?" The room tilted. Elsa clutched Clara tighter, felt the baby squirm against her chest. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Everything she'd prepared, every careful half-truth dissolved like morning frost. "Leave her alone," Wyatt said. His voice was low, dangerous. "She's done nothing wrong." "On the contrary." Harlan's eyes never left Elsa's face. "Using a false name is fraud. If she came here under false pretenses, claiming to be someone she's not, that's criminal deception. And if you knew about it, Mr. McKenna, if you aided and abetted this deception, that makes you an accessory." He walked closer to Elsa. She could smell his cologne, expensive and cloying. "The question is why? Why would a woman use her dead sister's name? Why would she travel all the way to Montana claiming to be a mail-order bride when no such arrangement existed, unless she was running from something, or hiding something?" "I'm not hiding anything," Elsa managed. Her voice sounded small, even to her own ears. "Then tell me the truth. All of it. And perhaps we can resolve this without involving the territorial marshal." Wyatt moved between them, his bulk suddenly filling the space like a wall. "You want the truth? Fine. Here it is. Mrs. Anderson came to my ranch in January. Yes, there was confusion about correspondence. Her sister had written to me using information from old advertisements without my knowledge. When Mrs. Anderson arrived and discovered the mistake, she had nowhere else to go. It was the middle of winter. She had a baby. I offered her work in exchange for shelter. That's all." "That's all," Harlan repeated. "How wonderfully simple. Except it doesn't explain why she's using a dead woman's name. Or why you, a man who's avoided human contact for 9 years, would suddenly take in a complete stranger." "Because I'm not a monster," Wyatt said quietly. "Despite what this town thinks." "Despite what you think?" "No. You're not a monster." Harlan's voice went soft, almost gentle. "You're a man who's been alone too long. A man who might be desperate enough for companionship that he'd overlook certain irregularities, who might even participate in deception if it meant not being alone anymore." He turned back to his desk, picked up a folder. "I've been collecting statements, Mr. McKenna, from people who remember the months before my brother's death. Several of them recall seeing you in town looking for Pastor James, asking where he lived, what his schedule was. One witness says you grabbed him by the collar and demanded to know where your sister was staying." "I was looking for Anna," Wyatt said. "She'd left my ranch without telling me where she was going. I was worried. Or you'd discovered the truth about her pregnancy, about James's involvement, and you were looking for him to exact revenge. I didn't know about the pregnancy until after she died. So you claim. But I have a letter. Mr. McKenna." Harlan pulled a yellowed envelope from the folder. "Written by Anna, dated 2 days before the fire. She sent it to a friend in Helena. Never posted it because she died before she could. But the friend kept it all these years. And she gave it to me last week." He held it up. "In this letter, Anna writes about her situation, about the baby, about James's threats, and she writes about you, Wyatt, about how you'd found out, about how angry you were, about how you swore you'd make James pay for what he'd done to her." "That's a lie," Wyatt said, but his voice lacked conviction. Elsa could see doubt creeping into his eyes, could see him trying to remember, trying to piece together what he'd known and when he'd known it. "Is it? Let me read you a passage." Harlan opened the letter, cleared his throat. "Wyatt knows now. I couldn't keep it from him any longer. He saw me being sick, saw how frightened I was, and he made me tell him everything. I've never seen him so angry. Not even when Father died. He said he'd go to James, make him take responsibility. I begged him not to, told him it would only make things worse. But I don't think he'll listen. I'm afraid of what he might do." Harlan looked up. 2 days later, Anna was dead. 3 days after that, James confessed to a crime that destroyed his reputation and drove him to suicide. Quite a coincidence, don't you think? Elsa felt Wyatt go rigid beside her, felt the tremor that ran through him the way his hands clenched and unclenched. She'd seen enough to know what was happening. He was doubting himself, questioning his own memories, wondering if maybe, just maybe, he'd done something terrible and buried it so deep he'd convinced himself it never happened. She'd seen Thomas do the same thing, had watched her husband spiral into guilt over imagined sins, real failures, the weight of simply existing in a world that felt too small for him. She'd watched it destroy him. She wouldn't watch it destroy Wyatt. "Stop," she said. Her voice cut through the room like a knife. "Just stop." Both men turned to look at her. Elsa handed Clara to Wyatt, saw his arms automatically move to cradle the baby even as confusion crossed his face. Then she turned to Judge Harlan. "You want the truth? Fine. Here it is. My name is Elsa Anderson. I was married to Thomas Anderson, who killed himself 3 years ago because he couldn't live with a wife who made him feel inadequate just by existing. I was a teacher in Chicago until I was dismissed for accidentally injuring a student because when you're my size, even accidents look like violence." She stepped closer to Harlan, made herself as tall as she could, made herself take up space the way she'd been taught not to. "Ingrid Nordstrom was my sister. She died giving birth to that baby 7 months ago. Before she died, she made me promise to keep Clara safe, to give her a home, to not let her end up in an orphan asylum where she'd be just another mouth to feed another child no one wanted." The judge's expression didn't change, but Elsa saw him shift back slightly. Ingrid found letters that Wyatt had written years ago to someone else. She copied them, changed details, created a fiction of a mail-order bride arrangement because she was desperate and dying and out of options. I didn't know about the deception until I arrived here. But when I discovered it, when I realized Wyatt knew nothing about any arrangement, I lied. I said Clara was mine. I said I was Ingrid. I did it to keep a promise to my dead sister. And Mr. McKenna, Harlan asked quietly, "What did he do when he discovered your deception?" "He let me stay." Elsa's voice cracked, "Even though I'd lied to him, even though he had every right to turn me out." He let me stay because it was winter and I had nowhere to go, and he's a better man than you'll ever give him credit for." "How touching." Harlan's voice dripped with false sympathy. "But it doesn't change the facts. You committed fraud. He harbored you. And somewhere in this touching tale of sisterly devotion and frontier charity, there's still the matter of my brother's death." "Wyatt didn't kill your brother," Elsa said. "Your brother killed himself because he couldn't live with what he'd done. And you know it. You've always known it. You just can't accept that the man you thought was a saint was actually a coward who drove a terrified girl to her death." "Careful, Mrs. Anderson." Harlan's eyes went cold. "You're very close to slander. It's not slander if it's true, and you know it's true. That's why you've spent 9 years trying to prove Wyatt was responsible. Because if he's guilty, then James was a victim. Then your family name stays clean. Then you don't have to live with the fact that your brother was the kind of man who'd threaten a pregnant girl rather than take responsibility for his actions." The room went silent. Harlan stared at her for a long moment, and Elsa stared back, refusing to flinch, refusing to make herself smaller. Then he smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "You're quite brave, Mrs. Anderson. Or quite foolish. I haven't decided which." He returned to his desk, sat down. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to return to the McKenna Ranch. You're going to continue your work there. And every week you're going to report to me about Mr. McKenna's activities, who he sees, what he says, any evidence of violent behavior or criminal intent." Elsa's blood went cold. "You want me to spy on him. I want you to help me ensure the safety of this community." Harlan folded his hands. "In exchange, I'll overlook your use of a false name. I'll forget about the fraud. I'll even let you keep the child, though by law, I could have her removed from your care immediately. And if I refuse, then I'll have you arrested for fraud and identity theft. The child will be placed in territorial custody, and Mr. McKenna will be charged as an accessory. You'll both spend the next several years in prison if you're lucky. If you're not, you'll hang." The words fell like stones. Elsa looked at Wyatt, saw the defeat in his eyes, saw him understanding that they'd walked into a trap with no way out. "I need an answer, Mrs. Anderson." "No." The word came from Wyatt. He stood still, holding Clara, and his voice was steady, firm. "You're not using her. You're not threatening her. If you want to arrest someone, arrest me. I'll confess to whatever you want. But you leave her alone." "How noble," Harlan said. "But I don't want a confession, Mr. McKenna. I want the truth, and I'm willing to use whatever leverage I have to get it." "Then you'll be disappointed, because the truth is exactly what I've been telling you for 9 years. I didn't kill your brother. I didn't threaten him. I didn't drive him to anything. He did that to himself." "We'll see." Harlan stood. "You have until tomorrow to reconsider. After that, I'll have the marshal issue warrants for both of you." He gestured toward the door. "This meeting is over." They walked out in silence. Down the stairs through the courthouse into the street where the afternoon sun made the snow glare white and painful. Elsa's hands shook. Her legs felt weak. She'd just destroyed everything. Had confessed to fraud, admitted her deception, given Harlan exactly what he needed to ruin them both. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. I should have kept quiet. I've ruined everything." Wyatt handed Clara back to her. "No. You told the truth. That took more courage than I've shown in 9 years. But now he has what he wants. He can arrest us. Take Clara. We're finished." "Maybe." Wyatt helped her into the wagon, then climbed up beside her. "Or maybe we finally stop running." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm tired, Elsa. Tired of hiding. Tired of letting Marcus Harlan control my life. Tired of being afraid." He snapped the reins and Goliath started forward. They rode through town in silence, past the staring faces and the whispered judgments. Elsa held Clara and tried not to cry. They were 3 miles out of town when Wyatt pulled the wagon off the road, stopped in a meadow where aspens clustered like pale ghosts and the mountains rose purple against a sky going gold with sunset. "Come on," he said. "I need to show you something." They walked into the trees, Clara sleeping against Elsa's shoulder. The snow here was deep and untouched, and Elsa followed Wyatt's footsteps because she didn't know where else to go, didn't know what else to do. He stopped in a clearing, pointed to a spot beneath the largest aspen. My mother's buried there, and my father beside her, and over there that's where I buried Anna, or what was left of her after the fire. He stood silent for a moment. I come here sometimes, when the guilt gets too heavy, when I need to remember why I keep going. He turned to Elsa. Anna's letter, the one Harlan read. I don't remember her telling me about the pregnancy, but maybe she did. Maybe I was so angry I blocked it out. Maybe I did go looking for James. Maybe I did threaten him. Or maybe Marcus Harlan forged that letter, or took a real letter and changed key passages, or found one that was ambiguous and interpreted it the way he wanted. Elsa moved to stand beside him. You can't trust anything he says, Wyatt. He's trying to make you doubt yourself. That's how men like him win. But what if he's right? What if I did something terrible and convinced myself I didn't? Then you'd remember. Elsa's voice was firm. I watched my husband destroy himself with guilt over things that weren't his fault. Things he imagined, things that existed only in his head. I won't watch you do the same. How can you be so sure? Because I've spent 2 months watching you, watching how carefully you move, how you check your strength constantly, how you make yourself smaller so others feel safe. You're not a violent man, Wyatt. You're a man terrified of his own capacity for violence. There's a difference. The sun was setting now, painting the snow pink and gold. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called. Wyatt stood very still, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. When Anna died, when I couldn't save her, I wanted to die too, wanted to follow her into that fire. The only thing that stopped me was knowing someone had to take care of the ranch. Someone had to remember her. Someone had to carry the weight of what happened. But you've been carrying it alone for 9 years. Yes, that's too long. Elsa shifted Clara to her other arm. No one should carry that kind of weight alone. Is that why you stayed? Even after you knew I'd figured out you were lying? Because you understood what it meant to carry guilt. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go. Elsa met his eyes. But I'm glad I did. Because you're the first person in years who's looked at me and seen just a person, not a freak, not a burden, not something to be afraid of, just someone trying to survive. The clearing was very quiet. The light was fading fast now, the way it did in Montana winters. Soon it would be dark and cold, and they'd need to get back to the ranch. But for this moment they stood together in the snow, two people who'd never fit anywhere learning what it meant to fit with each other. When I found that letter from Sarah, the one she sent before she died, Wyatt said quietly, I almost didn't open it. I was afraid of what it would say. Afraid she'd found happiness with someone else and wanted to rub it in. Afraid she'd curse me one last time. But you did open it. Eventually. Wyatt's hand went to his coat pocket, pulled out a worn envelope. She wrote it 6 months before she died, before the consumption took her. She said she'd spent years regretting her choice. Said she realized that fear of a person's capacity for violence isn't the same as actual violence. That she'd let one moment of seeing me desperate and afraid define me forever when I'd shown her nothing but gentleness before that. He held out the letter. She said she was sorry, that she hoped I'd found someone who could see past my size to who I really was, that she hoped I'd forgiven myself the way she'd finally forgiven me. Did you forgive yourself? No. Wyatt looked at the graves. But maybe that's why you're here. To remind me that forgiveness is possible. Elsa's throat tightened. I don't know how to forgive myself either. For Thomas. For the lies I've told you. For putting you in danger with Harlan. Then, maybe we learn together. The stars were coming out now, more stars than Elsa had ever seen. The Milky Way stretched overhead like God had spilled diamonds across black velvet. Wyatt reached out and Elsa took his hand. It engulfed hers, warm and calloused and steady. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said quietly. Whatever Harlan does, we face it together. No more secrets. No more running. Just the truth, however complicated it is. Just the truth, Elsa agreed. They stood there until Clara woke crying with cold and hunger. Then they walked back to the wagon, back to the ranch, back to the uncertain future that waited for them. But they didn't walk alone. And for the first time in 9 years, Wyatt McKenna felt something that wasn't guilt or fear. He felt hope. They didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. The weight of what was coming pressed down like the Montana sky before a storm heavy and inevitable. Elsa sat by the window with Clara in her arms, watching the moon track across the darkness, and tried to imagine what morning would bring. Arrest. Separation. The loss of everything she'd tried to build from lies and desperation. Wyatt was in the locked room. She could hear him moving things, opening drawers, the rustle of paper. He'd been in there for hours, and when he finally emerged near dawn, his eyes were red-rimmed and his hands were full of documents. "What are you doing?" Elsa asked. He emerged holding Anna's diary, and for the first time he left the door open behind him. Elsa glimpsed inside a cradle never used, baby clothes carefully folded, a life that had died before it began. "I kept it locked because I couldn't bear to see it," Wyatt said quietly. "But maybe it's time to let the light in." Finding ammunition, he spread the papers across the table. Letters, receipts, a deed. Anna's diary, the one I could never bring myself to read. If Harlan wants the truth, I'll give him the truth. All of it. Elsa moved closer still, holding Clara. The diary was small, leather-bound, its pages filled with feminine handwriting. She could see Anna's name on the first page and a date. January 1877. 9 years ago. "Have you read it?" "Not until tonight." Wyatt's voice was rough. "I couldn't. Every time I tried, I'd see her face. Remember her laugh. Feel the guilt all over again. And now I don't have a choice." He opened to a page marked with a ribbon. She wrote about James, about how he courted her, how charming he was, how he made her feel special, chosen. And then how things changed when she told him about the baby. What did she say? Wyatt's jaw tightened. She was afraid, not just of being unwed and pregnant, afraid of him. She wrote that he'd grabbed her arm once hard enough to leave bruises, that he'd called her terrible names, that he'd threatened to have her declared insane if she told anyone. He slid the diary across to Elsa, read this entry, dated 3 days before the fire. Elsa read, her heart sinking with each word. "James came to the ranch today. Wyatt was in town, thank God. James said he'd made arrangements. There's a place in Helena, he said, where women like me can go, where they take care of problems. He gave me money and an address. Said if I loved him, if I wanted any chance of a future together, I'd go there and take care of it. When I said no, when I said I was keeping my baby, he changed. His face went cold. He said, 'Then you'll do it another way.' He said fire was a blessing sometimes, a cleansing. He said accidents happened all the time on ranches, especially to careless women. Then he left. I've been too frightened to sleep. I keep checking the doors, the windows. I don't know what to do. I'm afraid to tell Wyatt because I know what he'll do. I'm afraid not to tell him because I don't know if I'll survive another visit from James alone." Elsa's hands shook. She threatened her, directly, told her to kill herself, or he'd do it for her. Wyatt's voice was hollow. "I think he came back the next night. I think he started that fire, and I think Anna knew in those last moments exactly who'd murdered her. This changes everything." Elsa stood quickly, nearly waking Clara. "This proves James was the violent one, that he threatened her, that he probably killed her. Harlan can't ignore this." "Can't he?" Wyatt gathered the papers. "He spent 9 years building a case against me. You think he'll throw that away because of a diary that's been in my possession the whole time? He'll say I forged it, or that I'm selectively reading passages that support my version of events. Then we need more. We need someone who can corroborate Anna's fear, someone who saw the bruises, heard her talk about James's threats. Everyone who knew Anna is either dead or left Silver Creek years ago." Wyatt slumped in his chair. "It's my word against a dead pastor's reputation, and a judge who's decided I'm guilty." The cabin fell quiet except for the crackle of the fire. Outside, dawn was breaking gray and cold. In a few hours the marshal would come. They'd be arrested, separated. Clara would be taken. And all of this, everything Elsa had tried to protect, would crumble to nothing. Unless... She looked at Wyatt, at this man who'd shown her more kindness than she deserved, who'd let her stay when he could have turned her away, who'd held her hand under the stars and made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved something better than survival. "Marry me," she said. Wyatt's head snapped up. "What?" "Marry me. Today. Now. Before the marshal comes." "Elsa, that's not going to solve anything." "It might. If we're married, I'm not just a woman using a false name. I'm your wife. That gives me legal standing. Makes my presence here legitimate. Makes it harder for Harlan to claim fraud or deception." Wyatt stood slowly. "You'd do that. Marry a man you barely know, tie yourself legally to someone the whole territory thinks is a murderer just to avoid arrest." "I'd do it to protect Clara." Elsa's voice was steady. "And I'd do it because you've been honest with me when you had every reason to lie. Because you've been kind when you could have been cruel. Because in 2 months you've shown me what it means to be seen as a person, not a problem." She moved closer. "I'm not asking for love, Wyatt. I'm not asking for promises we can't keep. I'm asking for a partnership. A legal arrangement that protects us both. And what happens when spring comes, when Harlan gives up or we prove my innocence or whatever resolution this mess finds? Do we just dissolve the marriage like it never happened?" "I don't know." Elsa met his eyes. "But I know that right now, in this moment, it's the only move we have left." Wyatt was quiet for a long time. Then he crossed to the window, looked out at the breaking day. "There's a circuit preacher who comes through Silver Creek once a month. He's supposed to arrive today. I saw it posted at the courthouse. Then we go to him. We get married before Harlan can stop us. And if he refuses, if word's already spread about who you are, what we've done, then we find another way. But we try this first." She touched his arm. "Please." He turned, and in his eyes she saw fear and hope and something else, something deeper. "All right. But not as a partnership. Not as a legal arrangement. Then as what?" "As the truth." Wyatt's voice was quiet. "I'm asking you to marry me because in 2 months you've become the only person I want to face this with. Because when I think about spring, about you leaving, it feels like something dying inside me. Because I've been alone for 9 years and I don't want to be alone anymore." He took her hand. "Not if the alternative is being with you." Elsa's breath caught. "Wyatt, I've lied to you. I've put you in danger. I'm wanted for fraud, and you're wanted for murder, and we have no money, and no prospects, and a baby who isn't even mine." "I know. And I don't care. Do you?" She thought about saying yes. She cared. This was insane. They barely knew each other. But the words that came out were different. "No, I don't care either. Then marry me. Not because it's strategic. Because you want to." "I do want to," Elsa whispered. "God help me, I do." Wyatt pulled something from his pocket. A ring carved from Montana agate, the stone polished until it glowed with bands of gold and amber and deep earth brown. The craftsmanship was exquisite. Every curve deliberate, every edge smooth. "I made this for Anna," he said quietly, "before she died. She was going to need a wedding ring once the baby came, once she decided what to do about James. I wanted her to have something beautiful, something that said she was valued." He held it out. "I kept it all these years because I couldn't bear to throw it away, couldn't bear to admit she'd never wear it. But I think she'd want you to have it. I think she'd want something good to come from all this pain." Elsa took the ring with shaking hands. It was warm from his pocket, smooth against her palm. It fit her finger perfectly, like it had been made for her all along. "We should go," she said, "before I lose my courage." They wrapped Clara in every warm thing they owned, hitched Goliath to the wagon, and rode toward Silver Creek through the breaking dawn. The town was just waking when they arrived, smoke rising from chimneys, shopkeepers sweeping steps. A few early risers stopped to stare at the McKenna wagon, at the giant, and the tall woman and the baby between them. "Let them stare," Wyatt said. "Let them see." The church was a simple building, White clabbered with a bell tower. The circuit preacher's horse was tied outside, which meant he'd arrived overnight. Wyatt helped Elsa down, and together they climbed the steps. Inside the church smelled of beeswax and old hymnals. A man stood at the altar arranging candles short and round with kind eyes. He turned when they entered, and his expression shifted from welcome to wariness in an instant. "Mr. McKenna," he said carefully. "I wasn't expecting you." "Reverend Matthews." Wyatt removed his hat. "We need to be married. Today. Now, if possible." The Reverend's eyes moved to Elsa, to Clara, back to Wyatt. "I see. And the lady is?" "Elsa Anderson. Soon to be Elsa McKenna if you'll perform the ceremony." "I'm afraid I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because Judge Harlan came to see me last night, told me about your situation, about the fraud allegations, the questions surrounding your involvement in Pastor James's death. He strongly suggested I avoid any entanglement with your affairs. Suggested, or threatened." Wyatt's voice went hard. "Does it matter?" The Reverend spread his hands. "I'm sorry, Mr. McKenna, truly, but I can't risk my position here. The church board would have my head, even though we're asking for a legal sacrament, even though we have every right to marry. Rights and practicalities are different things. I'm sorry." They stood there in the morning light streaming through plain glass windows. Elsa felt hope draining away like water through cupped hands. They'd tried. It hadn't worked. Now they'd go back to the ranch and wait for the marshal, and that would be the end. "Then I'll marry them." The voice came from the back of the church. They all turned. An old woman stood in the doorway dressed in widow's black, her face lined with years, but her eyes sharp and bright. "Mrs. Pritchard," the Reverend said, "this isn't your concern. Everything in this town is my concern, Everett. I've lived here 50 years, buried 2 husbands in the cemetery out back. I think I've earned the right to speak my mind." She walked forward leaning on a cane. "You're Wyatt McKenna. I remember you. Remember your sister, too. Sweet girl, beautiful voice. Used to sing in the choir before that bastard James Harlan ruined her." The Reverend blanched. "Mrs. Pritchard, please." "Oh, hush. I'm old enough to call things what they are." She looked at Elsa. "And you're the woman using a dead girl's name. Caused quite a stir in town." Elsa lifted her chin. "I am. Why? Because I made a promise to my dying sister to protect her child, and I'd do it again." Mrs. Pritchard nodded slowly. "Good. That's what I wanted to hear. Too many people make promises and break them the moment it's inconvenient." She turned to the Reverend. "I'm a licensed lay minister, Everett. Have been for 20 years. I can perform marriages. You haven't done one in a decade. Then I'm due." She positioned herself at the altar. "Come on, then. Let's get this done before Marcus Harlan shows up to stop it." Wyatt and Elsa moved to stand before her. Clara had woken and was watching everything with wide, dark eyes. Mrs. Pritchard looked at the 3 of them, and something softened in her expression. "I knew Anna McKenna," she said quietly. "Knew what she was going through. Tried to help, but she was too scared to accept it. When she died, when James confessed and killed himself, I knew the truth. Knew he'd driven her to it. Knew Marcus Harlan was lying when he blamed you, Wyatt. Why didn't you say anything? Because I'm an old woman with no power and less influence. Because speaking against a judge would have accomplished nothing except making me a target." She gripped her cane. "But I can do this. I can marry you. I can give you one piece of legal protection. So let's do it." She opened a prayer book, the pages worn and soft. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God, and these witnesses to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The words washed over Elsa like water. She'd heard them before at her wedding to Thomas in a Chicago church with her mother crying and strangers filling the pews. That marriage had felt like surrender, like giving up on the possibility of being wanted for who she was. This felt different. This felt like choosing, like stepping forward instead of backing down. "Wyatt McKenna, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was steady, certain. "Elsa Anderson, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Elsa looked at Wyatt, at his scarred hands and gentle eyes, at the way he held himself carefully like he was afraid of breaking something precious. at the man who'd given her shelter and honesty and the first real kindness she'd known in years. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife." Mrs. Pritchard smiled. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. McKenna." Wyatt looked at Elsa, uncertain. She smiled, and he bent down, and their lips met in a kiss that was soft and brief and full of promise. When they pulled apart, Elsa saw tears on his cheeks. "Thank you," he whispered to Mrs. Pritchard. "Don't thank me yet. You've still got Marcus Harlan to deal with, but at least now you face him as a married couple. That counts for something." They signed the license. Mrs. Pritchard signed as witness. The Reverend, looking uncomfortable, signed as well. And just like that, Elsa Anderson became Elsa McKenna. They were walking out of the church when the marshal arrived. He was young, nervous, with 2 deputies behind him looking equally uncomfortable. He held a folded paper in his hand. "Wyatt McKenna, Elsa Anderson. I have warrants for your arrest on charges of fraud and accessory to fraud." Wyatt stepped forward. "I'm Wyatt McKenna. This is my wife, Elsa McKenna. We were just married." The marshal blinked. "Your wife?" "That's right. We have the license." Mrs. Pritchard performed the ceremony. The marshal looked at the paper in his hand, then at them, then back at the paper. "Judge Harlan's going to want to see this." "Then let's not keep him waiting," Wyatt said. They walked to the courthouse together, a strange procession, the giant and the tall woman and the baby, the nervous marshal and his deputies, Mrs. Pritchard following with her cane, muttering about judges who didn't know justice from vengeance. Judge Harlan was in his office. When he saw them, his face went pale, then red. "What is this?" "We're married," Wyatt said simply. "As of 20 minutes ago, which means the fraud charges against my wife are considerably more complicated than you thought." "Your wife?" Harlan's voice was ice. "You married a woman wanted for criminal deception." "I married the woman I love. The charges are your problem, not mine." Harlan looked at the marriage license, his hands shaking slightly. "This doesn't change anything. The law is the law. Actually, it changes quite a bit." Mrs. Pritchard stepped forward. "As Mrs. McKenna, she has legal standing as a married woman. Any name she used prior to marriage is superseded by her married name. The fraud charges become substantially harder to prosecute." "And who asked for your legal opinion?" Harlan snapped. "No one. I'm giving it anyway." Mrs. Pritchard's eyes were hard. "Just like I'm giving you this." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "This is a statement signed and notarized detailing what I know about the events leading to Anna McKenna's death, about the bruises I saw on her arms, about the conversation I overheard between her and your brother in which he threatened her life. You have no such statement. I do now. Had it drawn up last night after you made the rounds telling everyone to avoid the McKennas. Reminded me why I kept quiet all these years. Fear. But I'm old and tired and done being afraid of men who hide behind power." She set the paper on Harlan's desk. "You want to prosecute someone, prosecute me for withholding evidence. But leave these people alone. They've done nothing except survive in a world that wanted them small and quiet and gone. But that's not all." Mrs. Pritchard continued. "Sheriff Clayton has evidence too. Letters proving Judge Harlan knew about the pregnancy before Anna died, knew his brother threatened her. He could have stopped it. Instead, he gave James money to leave town, told him to handle it quietly. When James stayed and confessed instead, Harlan decided you were the easier target to blame." Clayton stepped forward, holding a worn ledger. "Bank records, Your Honor. $50 withdrawn from the Harlan account 3 days before Anna's death. Marked personal matter." The teller remembered, said the judge was nervous when he took it. The office was silent. Harlan stared at the paper like it was a snake. Finally, he looked up at Wyatt. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is." Wyatt's voice was quiet but firm. "You've spent 9 years trying to prove I killed your brother. I didn't. He killed himself because he couldn't live with what he'd done. And you know it. You've always known it. You just chose revenge over truth." He took Elsa's hand. "We're leaving now. We're going back to our ranch. If you want to come after us, you'll need better evidence than forged letters and old grudges. Otherwise, leave us alone." They walked out. Down the stairs, through the courthouse, into the street where the whole town had gathered to watch. Elsa held her head high, held Clara close, held Wyatt's hand like it was an anchor. And then something happened that she didn't expect. Mrs. Pritchard began to clap, slow, deliberate, her old hands making a sound like distant thunder. One person joined her, then another, then a dozen, until half the town was applauding and the other half was silent with shame. Wyatt helped Elsa into the wagon, climbed up beside her, snapped the reins. They rode out of Silver Creek through a gauntlet of watching eyes, some friendly, some hostile, all uncertain what to make of the giant and his bride. They were a mile out of town when Elsa started laughing. It bubbled up from somewhere deep, unexpected, and uncontrollable. Wyatt looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "We did it," she gasped. "We actually did it. We got married to avoid arrest. I'm not sure that counts as winning. We're alive. We're together. Clara's safe. That's winning enough." Wyatt smiled, then really smiled, and Elsa saw how it transformed his face. Made him look younger, lighter, like a man who'd been carrying weight for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. 6 months, he said. That's how long marriages have to last before they're considered valid for legal purposes. If you want an annulment after that, I'll understand. Elsa looked at the ring on her finger, at the mountains rising purple in the distance, at the sky so big it hurt. "Ask me in 6 months," she said. "See what I say." They rode home through the afternoon light, and when they reached the ranch, Wyatt lifted her down from the wagon with hands that were gentle despite their strength. "Welcome home, Mrs. McKenna," he said. And for the first time in her life, Elsa felt like she'd found a place where that word meant something true. Home. Not because the cabin was grand, or the land was rich, or the future was certain, but because she was finally blessedly allowed to be exactly who she was. That was the biggest thing she'd ever seen, and it was more than enough.